I caught my wife cheating, but I didn't confront her. I just watched and waited. What happened next? Even I didn't see it coming. When life hits us with unexpected turns, we often find ourselves chasing new directions, looking for slivers of happiness among the mess. We stumble into joy, face heartbreak, wrestle with changes, and all of it becomes part of the story we're writing whether we're ready or not. That morning, Jim Fox woke up with a pit in his stomach, the kind that sits heavy before something hard. Sleep had been rough, restless. His mind had been running in circles all night, replaying what he saw at the mall, a moment that had caught him completely off guard. His daughter's boyfriend, the one she trusted, had been tangled up in an all-too-intimate moment with a girl from her own circle of friends. And it wasn't just a passing hug or some innocent touch. It was the kind of kiss that made it crystal clear something was going on behind Emily's back. Jim knew his daughter well enough to understand how deeply this would shake her. Emily wasn't just anyone, she was focused, driven, with a big volleyball match ahead that afternoon. A district semifinal, no less. He didn't want to throw her off her game, but keeping this secret weighed heavily on him. His plan was to wait until after the match, hoping she'd be in a better space to handle what he had to say. As his thoughts drifted, Jim found himself thinking back to a conversation he'd had just the day before with his supervisor. That meeting had taken an unexpected turn too. He'd been called into the office and introduced to a large, slow-moving man named Ralph Jenkins. Jim offered a firm handshake and kept quiet, waiting to hear what this was about. "Jim," his boss began, "we've just wrapped up a deal to buy Precise Buffers down in Daytona Beach. You just met Ralph, the man who used to run the place. Starting early next year, that facility will be ours, and I want you to lead the maintenance operations there." Jim sat up straighter. That wasn't what he expected to hear. "I know you've been frustrated with the lack of room to grow here, and we've heard you. This new role is a promotion. Between now and the end of the year, you'll be shadowing Ralph, getting to know the crew, the systems, the whole operation. You already know our equipment inside out, so the transition should be smooth." Then came the bigger question. "One thing we need to know, is your family ready to relocate to Daytona Beach?" His boss explained that the company's purchase included a 2-bedroom apartment, previously owned by Ralph's firm. It would be theirs to use rent-free for a full year. By then, Jim could decide whether to stay and buy a home or move on. And before Jim could fully process all that came the final hook. "Oh, and the position comes with a 25% raise. How much time do I have to think it over?" Jim asked, though he already knew what he was leaning toward. His answer was immediate, almost automatic. "My wife's been begging to get out of these cold Pennsylvania winters," he said with a half-smile. "Her biggest fear was that we'd get transferred somewhere even colder, like Michigan. She'll be thrilled once I bring up the raise and the move to Daytona Beach," Jim thought, picturing the look on Helen's face. Still, something didn't sit right. He sat in his car, engine off, parked down the street, waiting. Watching. He figured she'd eventually step out so he could see who she was with. But after a few minutes, it became clear that just sitting there wasn't going to get him any closer to the truth. That's when an idea popped into his head. Simple, a little desperate maybe, but it just might work. A few days ago, Helen had him fix the spare tire from her car. He never got around to putting it back in her trunk. It was still sitting in the garage, propped up against the wall. If she got a flat today, she'd have no choice but to call him. With one last glance around, Jim slipped out of his car and moved quietly toward her vehicle. He pulled out his pocket knife, flipped it open, and knelt by the spare mounted on her car. One quick slice to the valve stem was all it took. Then he slipped away unnoticed, back into the driver's seat. Not long after, Helen came out to the car. She popped the trunk and bent down to remove the wheel. As she placed it on the sidewalk, Jim saw her walking up with a man he didn't recognize. "Frank, buy this for Emily," Helen said, her voice laced with concern. "She's got a big game tonight and she can't be tired or worse, injured." "Thanks for looking out for me, Mom," Emily replied, but there was frustration behind her words. "But if you really wanted to help, you could have at least gotten dressed before I showed up. I've got to get to school and warm up for the match. Can you take over from here?" "No problem," Jim chimed in, trying to ease the tension. He glanced toward the man beside Helen. "I've gotten to know this guy a bit. He's a family man, decent guy." Emily turned, nodding toward Frank. "He's smart, charming, a great dad, and from what I've heard, he's a solid provider." Jim's jaw tightened. "He's also cheating on his wife," he said quietly. "You're saying I'm a good husband because I've stayed loyal, Frank? He wouldn't be sneaking off to a rundown motel with a married woman if he gave a second thought to his own wife and kids." Emily's face hardened. "That's disgusting," she snapped. "It's not just wrong, It's cruel. Helen, clearly irritated, snapped back. I am not some cheap fling if that's what you're suggesting. Jim suspected Helen had no intention of moving to Daytona anymore. Maybe it was the idea of leaving her new boyfriend behind, or maybe she just didn't see a future with him anymore. The longer he sat with the thought, the more it stung. He'd worked hard, been faithful, tried to build a life worth something. And all this time he believed Helen loved him back. But then he started piecing it together. Helen's sudden rush of affection since Labor Day, it hadn't been spontaneous, it had been strategic. She must have figured that as long as she kept the bedroom lively, he'd stay content and wouldn't question anything. He'd been played. And it burned. Later, when they got home, Emily glanced around the kitchen. Is Dad going to be there to cheer me on? I hope he's not sick or something, she said. Helen walked ahead of her into the house and immediately noticed the empty beer cans on the kitchen table. A full six-pack was down to one or none. That wasn't like Jim. Concerned, she said, That's not like him at all. I'm going to check on him. She walked through the house, checked the bedroom, the garage, even the living room. No sign of him. She returned to the kitchen, a puzzled look on her face. He's not in bed. Not in the garage. He's not watching TV either, she said. Emily looked up from tying her sneakers. Then where do you think he is? I really don't think Dad would see it that way, Emily said, her voice firm. And if you keep carrying on like this, he's going to figure it out eventually, but not because I told him. Helen raised a brow. If you don't say anything, he won't suspect a thing. Your father trusts me completely? Emily didn't respond. She just gave her mother a long look before turning away and heading into her bedroom, closing the door behind her. At 5 o'clock the next morning, Jim's eyes opened. No alarm needed. He slipped out of bed quietly, dressed without waking anyone, and left the house. By 6, he was sitting alone at an IHOP, finishing a simple breakfast when his phone rang. Jim, are you okay? Helen's voice came through the line, laced with concern. You didn't come home last night? I thought, she hesitated. I thought maybe something happened. Just a couple of days ago, those words might have made Jim pause. Might have even stirred guilt. But now they didn't land the same. He recognized her panic, but it didn't reach him. Her anger, her worry, they didn't hold weight for him anymore. What difference did it make to him whether she was happy, sad, furious, or fine? That switch had flipped. Quietly he ended the call and walked out. About 10 minutes later, he was sitting at a nearby sports bar, ordering a rack of ribs and a drink. Something about the whole moment felt freeing. He was genuinely surprised he could still enjoy himself. A couple of beers, some good conversation about football with strangers, and for a little while he forgot the storm back home. When he finally walked in around 11 that night, Helen and Emily were sitting together in the living room. They glanced up as he entered, but Jim barely looked their way. He moved past them, headed straight to the second bedroom, and shut the door behind him. Helen was starting to feel the weight of it. She had been juggling her double life smoothly, up until now. She couldn't figure out what had changed in Jim over the last few days. There hadn't been an argument. No accusations. No raised voices. He hadn't even given her the usual sharp stare when he suspected something was wrong. He was just cold, distant, and it unsettled her. He'll snap out of it, she muttered under her breath, convincing herself. The intimacy we've had, there's no way he walks away from that forever. But Sunday came and nothing changed. Jim woke up early again, had his breakfast alone at IHOP, and then wandered the park for hours. The breeze had a November bite, but he welcomed the chill. It reminded him he was alive, thinking clearly for the first time in years. That night, when he got back home, he walked right past Helen and the kids without a word. He entered the guest room, undressed, crawled into bed, and closed the door behind him. No good night, no eye contact. Just silence. Over the next 3 days, Jim barely spoke a word. Not to Helen, not to Emily. It was like he'd vanished from inside his own skin, choosing silence as his shield. Helen had never seen him like this, so stubborn, so unreadable, and it made her nervous. Then on Tuesday the day spiraled again. She met Frank at the motel. And wouldn't you know it, another flat tire. That made 2 in 1 week. The odds didn't sit right with her. Not anymore. The idea that both were just bad luck? No, she didn't buy it. Not now. Later that evening, the air between Helen and Emily grew thick again. Helen could feel the judgment in her daughter's eyes. You act like your father's irrelevant, Emily said sharply. Like he's just in the way. But you rush to make Frank happy like he's the one who matters. Helen fired back. At least Frank treats me with decency. He doesn't drink himself into a corner or hang up on me mid-sentence. Emily didn't blink. Maybe he also climbs into your bed every chance he gets. Helen turned away. But the comment lingered. He's a good guy? Emily questioned, her voice rising with disbelief. Does he take out the trash? Mow the lawn? Fix the fence or pay the bills? Does he cover our mortgage? Helen hesitated. Well, no. But that's not the point. Then what is the point? Emily shot back. Frank doesn't do anything except climb into your bed. Helen frowned, unsure of how to respond. He didn't even come to my volleyball match, Emily continued. Dad did. Frank didn't want to go, so why is he the one mad at us? That's a fair question, Helen admitted quietly, taken aback by her daughter's clarity. I want to know what's going on, Emily said, heading toward the kitchen. Helen followed close behind. Once again they found the kitchen counter littered with empty beer cans. Another six-pack, gone. And once again no sign of Jim. The house was quiet. It's only 8 o'clock, Helen said, looking toward the hallway. There's no way he's already in bed. They crept to the guest room and gently knocked. No response. Jim was completely unresponsive, locked in sleep, as though he were in another world entirely, one they no longer had access to. Defeated, both women returned to the living room. Helen tried to start a conversation to offer a branch of peace, but Jim didn't want it. Whatever part of him had still been reaching for connection was gone now. Later that evening her parents came by. They always liked Jim. Respected him. And he returned the favor, greeting them warmly as if nothing had changed. A little while later Jim's own parents arrived, bringing a casserole and warm smiles. They all settled around the table, sharing polite small talk while passing plates of food. That's when Jim cleared his throat. I've got something I need to share, he said, his voice even. I'm being transferred to a different branch of the company. I'm leaving tomorrow morning. The assignment will last through spring, maybe longer. I'll be living in Daytona Beach for now. The table fell silent. Forks paused halfway to mouths. No one spoke. And then Frank walked in. Wearing a Dallas Cowboys sweatshirt, bold letters across the back reading Romo, he strutted into Jim's house like he owned the place. He had the kind of grin that made Jim's skin crawl. Hey Jimmy, Frank said, walking right up to him and extending his hand like they were old friends. I've heard a lot about you. Jim didn't move. He stared back at Frank, his jaw tight. He'd held back for days, maybe longer. But this moment, this smug man in his home making a joke of everything Jim had built, it was the last straw. Frank kept going, chuckling under his breath. Cowboys, huh? Man, Romo? You serious? That explains a lot. It wasn't about football. Jim knew it. Frank knew it. That laugh wasn't just about the jersey, it was about Jim's marriage, his dignity, the whole mess. Something inside Jim snapped. No warning, no words, just a flash of heat and a blur of movement. Jim's fist connected with Frank's face and the room erupted. Frank stumbled, blood pouring from his nose. People shouted. Chairs scraped back. Helen screamed. Jim stood there, breathing hard, fists still clenched. He didn't say a word. He just walked to the hallway, grabbed his coat and stepped outside. He let his phone ring. He knew who it was. He let the voicemail take it. A few minutes later he checked the text. Jim, call me. I know this transfer has hit you hard, but please, try to keep yourself together. Frank will be okay. He just needs surgery on his nose. He's not pressing charges. Please call me. Jim tossed the phone onto the passenger seat and stared ahead. They had dragged Frank to the hospital. Both sets of grandparents were shaken. His own mom had asked if he was losing his mind. Emily had tried to hold it together. Nancy had to be driven out by Helen, while Emily wiped the blood off the kitchen floor. Jim sat there in silence, gripping the steering wheel. And for the first time in a long while, he didn't feel like the bad guy. I think she's apologized 100 times already, Emily said, her tone flat, as if even that number didn't feel like enough. Other than that, not much happened. It was quiet. Jim nodded, but Emily wasn't quite done. Oh, and one more thing, she added. Mom's upset. She said you hung up on her again. She was still warming up when you passed out. Jim let out a breath, equal parts amused and tired. Yeah, he admitted. I could tell. That's why I called you instead. You're a lot more reasonable. There was a brief pause on the line. Then Emily asked, so, if I call while you're working, will you pick up? After a moment's hesitation, Jim replied, if it's you calling and I'm able to, yeah, I'll answer. Emily pressed gently, what about Mom? Can she call you? Jim's voice changed just slightly. If she wants to call just to tell me I'm a jerk, then no, she can skip that. But if it's something important, something about the house or family, then yes, she should call. That's fair, isn't it? I'll let her know, Emily said. Good luck with the new job. And stay warm down there. Thanks, Jim replied, touched by the sincerity in her voice. Emily hesitated once more before adding, Frank acted like a complete idiot. He disrespected you and you put him in his place. Honestly, any man would have done the same, even if he didn't know Frank was sleeping with his wife. That set Helen off. I'm not going to sit here and listen to that kind of language, she snapped from across the room. You live under my roof and you will treat me with respect, whether you think I deserve it or not. Jim, now far from the chaos, was unwinding by the pool when his phone buzzed again Wednesday night. He let it ring once before checking the ID. It was Helen. He debated letting it go to voicemail but finally answered. They want to talk, she said cautiously. But I'm not sure it'll do much good. Neither my parents nor yours were happy with how you handled things, with Frank. And the way you just left afterward? That didn't sit well. Then I guess there's no point in coming back for Christmas, Jim replied without emotion. I'm not going to show up just to be treated like the villain of the family. If they want me around because they enjoy my company, fine. But I'm not interested in standing in front of the firing squad just so they can tell me what a failure I am. Helen went quiet. Then her voice cracked slightly. You could still come home. Jim was caught off guard. Her words sounded less like a demand and more like a plea. But it was too late for that. Back at home, Emily observed quietly as her mother left the room, wiping tears from her eyes. She didn't say anything. There was nothing left to say. Meanwhile, in Daytona Beach, Jim was settling into his new rhythm. Every day he made time to swim, an hour just for himself. He felt the warmth on his skin, watched his tan deepen, and found comfort in the quiet. With each stroke in the water, each sunrise over the coast, Jim could feel something he hadn't felt in a long time. And for now that was enough. Jim had a solid grasp of the equipment at the new plant. Years of experience had made him confident he could keep things running without a hitch. If nothing else, he knew what he was doing here, and for once that was enough to steady him. But back at the factory office, things weren't quite as simple. Susan Struthers, one of the administrative staff, tossed a robe over her shoulders as she leaned on the doorframe of the break room, a teasing smile playing on her lips. That idiot didn't know what kind of gem he had, did he? Cheated on you, huh? Jim didn't respond. She didn't wait for him to. I'll be here after the holidays, Jim, she continued casually. Offer still stands. You know I'm not the only one around here with, let's say, unmet needs. Every woman in this building knows you're a gentleman. Always respectful, always helpful. We trust you. She gave him a look, half playful, half serious. If you end the marriage, there won't be a shortage of women lining up to help you feel human again. Jim offered a polite smile but said nothing. His thoughts were elsewhere. Back in Pennsylvania, things were unraveling. Frank had crossed a line that Jim couldn't ignore. And Helen, well, she seemed determined to keep pushing the boundaries of betrayal. Jim had tried to keep his distance, but after hearing more rumors, he couldn't stay away. He made the decision to head back, quietly, with purpose. Jim returned to the house late at night, slipped through the door unnoticed and crept upstairs. His heart thudded in his chest as he moved down the hallway. He had no doubt what he was walking into. His plan was simple. Catch them in the act, snap a few photos for evidence and then leave, cut all ties for good, return to Florida and be done. He opened the door to the guest room carefully and waited in the dark. But things didn't go according to plan. The house was silent. No voices, no movement. Helen didn't show. Neither did Frank. The confrontation never happened. By dawn, Jim had driven halfway across the state. He stopped at a cheap motel, paid in cash, and slept for a few hours before continuing his trip south. The morning light cast long shadows across the highway as he drove, reflecting on the chaos he'd left behind. He had crossed a line when he hit Frank. That moment played over in his head again and again. If Frank didn't recover well, if there were complications, this could get serious. The idea of prison wasn't abstract anymore, it was terrifyingly possible. How did I let it get this far? Jim whispered to himself, gripping the steering wheel tighter. He knew one thing for certain, he couldn't go back. Not to Helen. Not to Frank. Not to the version of himself who let things boil over like that. They weren't worth it. No matter what had happened, they weren't worth destroying his future over. Later that week, while Jim was back in Florida settling into his routine, his phone rang. It was his dad. We were upset, son, his father began. Thought you lost it. That maybe you snapped over a cowboy sweatshirt or something stupid. Jim let him speak. But now that we understand what really happened, your mother and I, we want to say we're sorry. We should have known better. You wouldn't react like that without a real reason. We're proud of you. Truth is, you showed more restraint than I would have. Thanks, Dad, Jim said, voice low. How's Emily? His father asked. Jim paused. She stayed at the house, but we had a long talk. A serious one. There's more going on than you think. You okay? I will be, Jim said. I gotta go. We'll talk more after the dust settles. Tell Mom thanks, and I love you both. After hanging up, Jim drove back to his apartment. It was Christmas Eve. He walked inside as the last bit of sunlight faded from the sky. It was the first Christmas he'd ever spent alone. The silence wrapped around him like a cold blanket. He turned on the TV, cracked open a beer, and sank into the couch, letting the flicker of the screen distract him. His thoughts wandered, to Helen, to Emily, to what might come next. He was still staring at nothing in particular when the doorbell rang. There was a soft knock at the door, then the ring again. When Jim opened it, he was met by Susan, standing there with a warm smile and a plate of cookies wrapped in foil. I saw your light was on, she said gently, and I just wanted to wish you a Merry Christmas. She didn't stay long. They had already agreed to keep things discreet, especially around the other residents at the condo. Jim knew how quickly rumors spread, and the last thing he wanted was to be the talk of the complex. But they made plans to meet later that afternoon at the heated pool. Nothing too intimate, just two people trying to find some peace on a complicated holiday. That evening, Jim found himself at Susan's apartment again. She had prepared a home-cooked meal, roast, mashed potatoes, and green beans, and it reminded him of the kind of Christmas dinners he used to look forward to before everything fell apart. After dinner, things grew quiet, intimate. One thing led to another, and they spent the rest of the evening tangled in something tender, something human. It wasn't fireworks. It was comfort. And right now that's what Jim needed most. He left Susan's place around 9, slipping back into his unit under the hush of darkness. He was almost certain that a few of the neighbors had seen him come and go, but at this point he didn't much care. A few minutes after he got home, his phone rang. Dad. It was Emily. You didn't come home for Christmas, she said softly. But I don't blame you. Mom's a wreck. And I feel like garbage. I'm so sorry. I was selfish and stupid, and now I'm paying for it. Don't blame yourself, Jim replied. I should have confronted your mother when I first had my suspicions. But I didn't. I let it fester. And the anger, it just kept building up. Honestly, if I had stuck around, I might have put both of them in the hospital. Emily laughed through her nose. No, you wouldn't have, Dad. You're not like that. Not with Mom. Frank, maybe. Jim gave a quiet chuckle. Fair enough. Emily sighed. Grandpa told me Frank fell down the stairs last night. Apparently he's banged up pretty bad, but they say he'll recover fully. Jim didn't respond. There was a pause. You know, Emily continued, if I had known you were spending Christmas alone, me and Nancy, we would have come with you. I guess you didn't want us there. That's not it, Jim said, his voice low. I just didn't want to drag you both into my mess. After everything, I guess I just needed to be alone. And maybe I didn't tell the full truth, but after being lied to day after day, maybe I earned that. Emily's voice cracked. This is going to destroy Mom. You don't have to tell her anything, Jim said calmly. But she'll find out. I'll send her my address by email. We'll negotiate the divorce by mail. No need for me to go back there. There was a long silence on the line. Meanwhile, back in Pennsylvania, Helen was spiraling. Her hands trembled as she spoke on the phone with her sister. He's really going through with it? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Yes, came the reply. He's had enough, Helen. Of the lies, the games, all of it. Divorce is next. Helen's voice cracked. I don't want a divorce. I don't even like Frank, I never liked him. None of this would have happened if he hadn't fallen down the stairs. You're not listening, her sister replied sternly now. This wasn't about Frank. You were doomed the moment you betrayed the man who loved you without conditions. The fall just sped things up. Helen didn't respond. She just stared out the window into the cold, dark silence of the backyard. The world she once knew was collapsing. And somewhere far away, under warm skies and palm trees wrapped in Christmas lights, Jim sat on his balcony with a quiet beer in hand. It wasn't the Christmas he imagined. But for the first time in a long while, it was peaceful. I dropped off your spare tire at the motel, Emily confessed over the phone, her voice tight with guilt. Dad was there. He saw everything. He heard everything. He knows now, Mom. Helen said nothing. He knows how we disrespected him. He knows you lied to him. And yeah, he knows you cheated. That silence on the line was louder than any argument they could have had. And there was something else Jim had to consider, something more personal, more terrifying. In the days after, as the weight of what happened settled in, he had to confront a darker possibility. What if Helen had passed something on to him? What if this betrayal came with a physical consequence? He got tested. A week later the results came in. He wasn't sick. That moment of relief hit him like a wave, silent, heavy, and full of strange gratitude. Life moved on. Jim threw himself into his work, and when he wasn't fixing machines he found himself fielding casual requests from the women around the condo. Little things at first, hanging shelves, fixing a faucet, adjusting a thermostat. It grew quickly. Turns out word had gotten around. One night he mentioned it to Susan with a half smile. "You know, I've been getting more and more of these odd favors from the ladies around here." Susan laughed a little too knowingly. "Well, I might have mentioned to a couple of them that you're very handy." Jim raised an eyebrow. "And I might have also mentioned," she said, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear, "that you're, very capable. In other areas." "You told them?" "They were sworn to secrecy," Susan said, biting her lip. "But I can't promise they didn't let it slip." The next weekend, Emily came to visit. She stepped into Jim's apartment, gave the place a once-over, and smirked when she saw a bowl of condoms sitting nonchalantly on his nightstand. "Wow," she said with a laugh. "Looks like you're being well taken care of." Jim chuckled. "I'm just trying to live, that's all." "You should, Dad. You deserve a little joy after everything that's happened." "Don't worry, I won't be in your way. I'll hang out by the pool, soak up the Florida sun while you're off at work." She pointed to the bright sky outside. "What's that orange ball in the sky again? Haven't seen it since, I don't know, maybe the 4th of July, 2 years ago?" Jim smiled. "Tomorrow evening when I get back from work, let's go out for dinner." Later that night, over quiet conversation, Jim found himself reflecting again. "Your mother made a huge mistake when she cheated," he said, not bitter, just honest. "We were supposed to be partners. And partners, real ones, they have to be honest with each other. They have to trust." Emily nodded. "Do you think you ever will again?" Jim paused. "I don't. I've tried, but I just don't trust her anymore." Emily hesitated. "So, I met Mom today at the pool. It was awkward. Really awkward. A bunch of women kept coming up to me and, well, let's just say I now know at least 4 of them are sleeping with you." Jim blinked. "Seriously?" She smirked. "They all think you're sweet, sensitive, charming, trustworthy, and very attractive. Apparently you've become the bachelor of the complex." He let out a long breath. "That's something." A few days later Helen showed up again. This time she wasn't angry or accusatory. She was composed. Quiet. "I've taken a new job," she said. "I'm relocating to Daytona. I'll be living here with Emily. We need to figure out what to do with the house." Jim stood there stunned. "We've never finalized the divorce," Helen added. "We've barely spoken. So I don't know what you want anymore." Jim looked at her carefully. "What made you decide to move here?" Helen offered a smile. "I just figured, maybe it was time I stopped freezing every winter." Jim raised an eyebrow. "Emily goes to school in Florida. I'm not sure that means you need to be here." There was a beat of silence. "I thought you'd already filed for divorce," Helen said, trying to keep her tone light. "But since you haven't, maybe? Isn't Frank single now?" Jim asked, cutting her off. His voice was calm but sharp. "You two could pick things back up." Helen didn't answer. And Jim didn't push. "I heard that," Helen said, folding her arms across her chest. "But if you're asking whether I care about Frank, I don't. Not one bit. That jerk can disappear for all I care." Jim looked at her quietly. "Honestly, I figured you'd already filed for divorce by now." "I thought you had," she replied. Jim exhaled slowly, trying to stay calm. "I've given you several reasons why I haven't. Truth is, I think I'm finally happy where I'm at. You know me, I hate change. And divorce, well, it tends to be messy." He glanced toward the pool outside. "But maybe it's time we actually talk about this," he added. "Really talk." Helen nodded, subdued. "If that's what you want. But, if you're asking, I'd like to stay married." Jim gave a small, humorless laugh. "You'd like to stay married? After everything?" Helen offered a soft shrug. "You made 4 women happy, Jim. I'm honestly impressed. Guess I wasn't the one who left a mark on you after all." "That did it?" Jim's calm cracked. "I'm not going to apologize for bringing joy to those women," he said, voice steady but firm. They're single. I've made it clear I'm not looking for anything permanent. No lies, no expectations. I treat them with respect and they walk away smiling. Helen lowered her gaze. And I give them something that I don't owe you anymore, he added. Not after what you did. There was a pause, then Helen looked up. What about me? What if I want a little fun too? I'm not asking for anything in return. I just feel like I owe you. After how you stood by me, even after I wrecked everything. Jim didn't respond. He just stared out the window, the silence between them stretching into something heavy. Mornings by the pool were quieter now. The women weren't cold to Helen, but they weren't warm either. There was a quiet understanding in their glances, that Helen had crossed a line and everyone knew it. Whenever one of the ladies made a pointed comment or asked an innocent-sounding question, Helen could feel the weight of it. It was clear, the marriage was broken. And everyone around her knew why. One morning, Susan Struthers approached Helen with a sunny smile and a knowing look. Helen, she said casually, have you picked out new bedding for Jim's room yet? Helen blinked, confused. It matches beautifully with the curtains, Susan added. And the carpet too. You've got a good eye. Helen forced a polite smile. Of course she had seen the room, of course she knew what it looked like. But Susan's comment wasn't about decor. It was a reminder. Jim had moved on. And Helen? She was still trying to figure out whether to chase what was already gone, or finally let it go.